His Excellency is the chairman at the Suez Canal Economic Zone, so is here representing a public sector entity within Egypt, and will be talking about the way that they are supporting trade and investment. Next to me, I have Mr. Basil Elhini, who is the chairman and MD of Mazir Insurance, which owns Egypt's largest non-banking finance group, and is here to represent insurance and the financial services sector. On my far left, I would like to introduce Siobhan Haviland, who is the Director General of the British Chambers of Commerce, visiting us from the UK, I believe. And very pleased to have Bobby Mellor, who is the Global Head of ESG for Vodafone, also with us on the panel. Our topic today is about the transition between trade and investment to circular economy and sustainable projects and procedures. Now, obviously, trade and investment, as we heard in the earlier session, is for the mutual benefit of both the giving and the receiving country or organization. And we heard about mutual economic growth in our earlier Q&A session. But that economic growth has traditionally, or just in the last 50 or 100 years, very much been associated with resource consumption and generating carbon emissions. And I guess that's why we're all here at COP, because we know that those have been challenges and we're here to do something about it for the future. So the challenge for today is, how do we still continue to stimulate that economic growth to mutual benefit and looking for that resilience of our economies for the benefit of our people, both north, south, east, west, but also moderating our use of natural resources and drastically reducing our carbon emissions compared with how things have happened to date. So that's the challenge that's been posed to this channel. How do we start to transition? And we'll be speaking a little bit about circular economy, about ESG more broadly, but also about that transition and how can we start to bring about change that is needed so rapidly. I'd like to begin by asking His Excellency a question to do with work that's being done within Egypt and being supported by the Egyptian government. The Suez Canal is clearly an absolute strategic piece of infrastructure, that key transport link that facilitates trade and investment really at a global scale. What is the Suez Canal Authority doing about supporting green growth of trade and investment, or green economic growth, at the same time trying to reduce carbon emissions? Perhaps you could tell us some of the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Hello? Sorry. First of all, thank you so much for having me here today. Thanks for Biba. One thing I want to clarify, we're not the Suez Canal Authority, we're the Suez Canal Economic Zone. So the channel for the Suez Canal Authority is managed by the Suez Canal Authority. Having said this, the Suez Canal Economic Zone is comprised of around 6 ports, 4 economic zones around the Suez Canal banks. We benefit a lot from what the Suez Canal offers to the world. And at the same time, we have access on the Mediterranean Sea, the Red Sea, in addition to 4 economic areas. Each have its own attributes to attract different types of industries. First, with respect to green hydrogen, we are very proud that we had our first pilot or phase 1 project being launched by His Excellency, the President of Egypt, yesterday. This one is the easy side. No one knew how much that this facility was arranged and completed in 10 months. So you have a facility that was approved, built, and start to operate in no more than 10 to 11 months within the SE zone. So with our partners, with the investors, we were able to achieve that milestone, which is very important. So what are we doing? We are doing a lot. Hello? We are doing a lot because we have been working for investors for the last 3 years, irrespective of green hydrogen or not, to enhance our regulatory structure, our incentives, different pillars to attract investments. That led, in addition to definitely our infrastructure. We invested heavily in the infrastructure, whether in industrial areas, in the ports, that attracted right now, we can say 16 different investors we signed MOUs for: green hydrogen, green ammonia, e-methanol, each for a different purpose, whether it's for decarbonization of industry, whether it's decarbonization of the sea freight industry, or generally burning green hydrogen to make electricity in Europe. The location of Egypt, whether providing accessibility to renewable energy with lands within the Egypt, sent to the grid, to the factories within the zone, is adding a lot of benefit. The connectivity between the industrial areas and the integrated economic areas between the industrial area and the ports is adding a lot of value and a value proposition for investors. That's why we got the 16 MOUs. We have 15 of which are based to renewable to energy, and only one in East Port Said, which is waste to energy. And they both make green fuel, as we say. The other 15 are in Sokhna area. Do we have more? Yes. We have maybe 7 or 8 lined up MOUs more to add. So do we desire MOUs? No. But definitely these investors need to spend a lot of money. They need to go out, finalize their feasibility studies, get their consultants, and finalize their offtakes, their feed, and so on. So they need time, and they're investing millions of dollars. So they need to feel that there's a commitment from the government to provide them lands. These projects are not projects that are done over 3-4 years and they stop. It's scaled up. It takes over 20 years for most of these investors to scale up. That's why we're talking about a new fuel, that will happen and will serve, in my point of view, the world for the next 50 to 100 years. It will be a replacement for most fossil fuels around the world. Egypt is doing a lot with respect to providing the ecosystem, the incentives, the atmosphere with the Swiss Economic Zone, with our partners at the Ministry of Electricity, with the Sovereign Fund. We're helping with that. The MOUs are signed between us and the investor together. We will even partake in part of these investments as contribution, whether in kind or investment cash. And for this to happen, we are signing framework agreements with a few that finished their homework on the 15th of November, as Her Excellency has stated, Dr. Hela. Why is this important? They're very sizable projects. We're not talking about projects, like I said, that run over 3-4 years and that's it. We're talking about scale up that has an immediate phase between 23 to 26. So we have our first projects launching and delivering green hydrogen in first half 26. Then the remainder of that to 2030. Then beyond that to 2040. This will have a huge impact on Egypt and the world. And Alistair was asking a question that I will answer to. Why would there be a benefit for localization? One of the things that we're working on, the second pillar, which is localizing complementary industries for this industry to flourish. The issue is today that why is green hydrogen not so much attractive for a lot of people? Because of the price. The price is still not at its best for emerging countries to take, but more developed countries to decarbonize. To do that, we need the scaling up as one. We need the complementary industries to come and house within Egypt, like the electrolyzers, the solar panels, the turbines, the maintenance, the vocational learning that we will be signing on the 15th with our partners, the batteries, electric batteries, and so on. All this will help in decreasing the cost that will be sent back to Europe. So there's a benefit for Europe in general, in the UK, to invest and localize some of that. It will not take any share that's already there. We have now a lead time, let's say, for example, on electrolyzers. So there's no ample supply out there to take someone else's job. We're working on an industry that is at its infancy. It's very important to the world. It will replace fossil fuels, and we need fast to bring it down to a price that will be suitable for the developed and the developing. To do that, there's a lot of things that needs to happen. And this is our role within the SE zone, to create that atmosphere, that ecosystem. And even one of my challenges today is the infrastructure that will be done after the signing on the 15th, from utility corridor, from the plants to the port, desalination plants, ammonia tanks, liquid bulk terminal, jetties, and maybe later on, after that, in 26, the green bunkering for ships. So there's a lot of work that we're doing with our relevant parties. There's two UK companies out of the 16 that have signed up MOUs. Some of them might be signing the framework agreement on the 15th. We'll see. We're still finalizing everything as we speak.
People are still doing their homework.
Yes, everybody has to do their homework. But I think this is a huge challenge. One last thing, and I will close. Just on 2 points, because a lot of people are saying, why too much MOUs? Because Egypt has a unique position. This industry will run through ships transporting this important green fuel energy from Sokhna to Europe, but that's not efficient. Later on, to be sent by pipes, and you are a southern European country. So therefore, sending a pipe from Egypt to Cyprus or Greece will serve and will help in decreasing the cost. And we're talking about this important fuel is built economics on it, proximity. So Egypt has an important value to Europe, and Europe has an important value to Egypt. So therefore, we need to work together to achieve the pricing point that will be acceptable by all. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you for introducing the question of scale as well, the need to start small and scale up. I'd like to move to ask Bobby a question in relation to the telecommunications industry, because clearly that's an industry that began, is it, 30 years ago or something, 25 years ago, I'm not quite sure, lose track of time, but, relatively new industry, but clearly at a massive global scale already. And we've seen, we're all very dependent on our QR codes for attending events like this. We've seen through the COVID pandemic how important technology is to be able to enable communications and to still do business around the world. So that growth of industry, Bobby, is fantastic. We're all benefiting from it here, but it also implies more products, more waste, upgrading mobile phones, technology changes. It's such a rapidly changing industry. How do you hold that with the need to reduce waste? Because surely they're in conflict with each other.
Thank you. Well, thanks for having me, and it's really great to be here in Egypt. This is the golden question for us as an industry. And I think, honestly, it's a bit broken, the system that we have today. So every year, about 1.5 billion new smartphones will be sold. That's enormous. And I look at that and I think, okay, that's 1.5 billion people with a nice, shiny new phone. But what happens to the other 1.5 billion phones that they had before? They probably still work. And what we're seeing is actually every single year, the amount of e-waste generated is equivalent to the weight of the Great Wall of China. It's enormous, and that's not just phones, that also includes computers, that includes washing machines, anything that's electronic. But this is growing at about 21% per year, and only 17% of that, as Ben mentioned earlier, is actually recycled. So we have this big issue, and it's an issue on a number of fronts. So one, it uses up precious resources. Inside our phones, we have everything from gold to copper to lithium. There's elements that I can't even pronounce in there, but they're in very, very short supply, and they're also needed for things like solar panels, electric car batteries, etc. So we need to preserve these, and we're using them up very, very rapidly. We're also creating an environmental issue because a lot of this waste is exported illegally to West Africa and dumped there. And then our third issue is a health one. So sadly, a lot of this waste is being burned openly to extract these precious metals, and that creates huge and horrible health issues. So we've got a big problem to solve, but I also see a big opportunity here, and I think this is where the sort of green economy angle comes in. So I think if we can actually establish proper formal e-waste recycling, there is a massive, massive job creation opportunity here. So we did some research in the UK last year, and we found that if we actually recycled all of our e-waste formally, just in the UK, that could create 500,000 jobs. That's massive. And then imagine if we could do that in Egypt as well, perhaps not just for Egypt's own waste, but the waste of the rest of the world. So there's a huge job opportunity here. We also have the opportunity on reducing those supply chain constraints and lowering the cost of some of the components. And the one that I'm most excited about is how we use our e-waste issue to address the digital divide. So almost half of the world is still offline, and we know that the biggest barrier to connectivity is the cost of a smartphone. So if we could use all of those smartphones that are sort of, everyone's got this drawer at home, well, I do anyway, that's got all of their old phones in from the past kind of 5 years, and most of them do actually still work. So if we can actually use that to create a supply chain of devices which we then refurbish, make sure they're a high standard, we could go a long way to addressing the digital divide in some of the lesser developed countries. So really I think we need 3 things to make this happen. The first is proper standards around refurbished phones. So at the moment, there is no standard of quality as to what a refurbished phone should look like. So if we want to formalize this, we need to work with governments, standard setting bodies to actually create a standard together. We then need big investment into recycling plants. The more and more I hear about Egypt, the more I think that this could be a great place to do it. You have the Suez Canal, and you have amazing talent, a brilliant workforce here. So that's an opportunity. And then I think the third area, which is really our responsibility as Vodafone, well, everyone's responsibility, is to change our behavior as consumers. So we all want the new iPhone or whatever it is, doesn't have to be an iPhone. And we need to start thinking more long term. And frankly, we are guilty of encouraging people to upgrade their phones at the end of their contract, advertising the kind of newest shiny thing. But we're now trying to make a shift across all of our markets to encourage people to keep their phones for longer. We're providing more insurance products. So if the phones break down, we can actually repair them rather than just swapping out for a new one. And just make it appealing to people to either have a refurbished phone or keep their phone for 3, 4, 5 years, because these things do work for quite a long time. So I think with those 3 things in place, we have a really big opportunity from an economic perspective, but also we can address this big planetary issue.
That's great. Thank you very much. Very exciting to hear what a large corporation is able to do in terms of kind of promoting that investment into looking at recycling, how do you refurbish, standards, discussions, etc. But where I come from in Kenya and across most of Africa, formal recycling is very, very limited. And what we do see, though, is a huge amount of informal sector, both reuse and recycling, because that's the only way that they would get access to certain goods and materials. But that's all very much in the informal sector. It's not formalized in any way, and it's not in any way that governments can support, because it is so informal and kind of operating below the radar. So what I'm wondering, Siobhan, is whether or not there's anything that organizations like the British Chamber can be doing to support small and medium enterprises, or is it all just about the large corporates like Vodafone?
Thank you, and good morning. Delighted to be here. First morning in Egypt. Thank you for having us. So, yes, I mean, SMEs make up about 80% of the world's economy in all countries. They tend to be the backbone of that economy. And at the Chambers, we're very much about supporting them on that journey to net zero. But remember, net zero, there's 2 sides of that coin. There's decarbonising, there's helping businesses decarbonise, but then, of course, there is making the most of the opportunities that the green economy presents to us all. So, we do a lot of work talking to businesses about what they're currently doing and how they're thinking about it. And what we know from our survey last year is that the SMEs in the UK, for example, only 11% of them have even measured their carbon footprint. Now, that was last year. And if you were, even if you were thinking about measuring your carbon footprint last year, the chances are now, with the energy crisis and the issues that we're facing across the globe, it's not even on your list of things to do. So on one side, we need to help them think about that and do something about it. And there are two key barriers. So one is, if you think about your organization, smaller organization, who in your organization knows how to measure a carbon footprint? Anyone here know how to measure a carbon footprint? 2 or 4. Well, not very many, we might say. So capability in your organization, who's going to measure the carbon footprint, A, and B, what you're worried about is you're going to get a report back that says you need to invest 50,000, 100,000 pounds in solar, new lights, whatever it may be. Well, you don't have 100,000 pounds sitting around in the bank to invest. Even with really high energy prices, it still feels like a massive thing to do because you are holding cash at the moment. So I'll come back to how the chambers are helping SMEs move down this journey. But what we're also saying is we're talking to government about what they need to do to help actually businesses, big and small, start on the green journey. And we heard earlier about how government don't have money, but actually what we're saying to government is we need the 3 C's from you, government. We need certainty. So what government can do is they can set out the frameworks, they can set the direction, they can set the policies, so we all know where the playing field is. Clarity, so where are we going and what are we measuring collectively on the way? And that will give us, as businesses, the confidence to invest for the future. So that's what we're saying to government. And then what we do as a chamber network is we really work together with our SMEs to take them on that journey. So we heard earlier, I talk about 5 key areas where the chambers are working. One's around acceleration. So we heard earlier about Miranda over there in the corner, East Lancashire, are running an accelerator. We run accelerators. Hers is called Red Cat. That is taking great new technologies, often from the local universities, and wrapping finance and R&D support around them so that they can grow rapidly. And we'll come back to trade. But of course, trading is driving that innovation. And if you didn't see Ngozi's article in the FT yesterday, dig it out because it's really fantastic about green trade. So acceleration, how can we help accelerate our SMEs in the green economy? 2, data. Our Aberdeen chamber, for those of you, I don't expect anyone's Scottish geography to be all that good, but that's the northeast coast of Scotland, huge oil and gas fields off the northeast coast, but of course now big wind farms off the northeast coast. And what they are doing is they're working with the oil and gas industry to measure how they are moving down that energy transition that we all want to see. 3 is supply chains, and I think this is where we come back to working with large businesses. In the southwest of the UK, EDF and the UK government are building a Hinkley Point nuclear power station. We as the chamber manage the supply chain for that nuclear power station. If you think about the local economic development that massive infrastructure build like that can drive, it is up to 4 billion across the UK. They employ 1,385 SMEs in the southwest alone as part of that infrastructure build. So huge economic development, and that is what we can support, for them as chambers. And that, of course, is really positive for you as a large business when you're working in a place. 4th is about supporting winners. So where you have places and spaces that support the right sort of business, for example, the Hull and the Humber in the UK, massive green hydrogen build, because they have the right historical industrial places to replace that with new green technology. And lastly, as Bobby was talking about, market making. So the UK, as you could imagine, has lots of old buildings and they're drafty and the energy efficiency is terrible. So we need to look at retrofitting our buildings to make them fit for the future. But that's a new market. You can't find anyone in the UK who's running a retrofitting business who knows how to install a heat pump. So that's about skills transition, but it's also about helping make markets. In Glasgow, for example, have set up a training academy to help people understand how to do that. Bobby was talking about the 500,000 jobs that you could effectively, brand new jobs in refitting old phones to be new phones. So we really can work with big businesses on supply chains and market making in those markets. So I'll stop there, but there's a lot that we can be doing to support our SMEs.
That's great. Thank you very much, Siobhan. I'd like to move to Mr. Al-Hini, thank you, because what both Bobby and Siobhan have been talking about is a lot of innovation and change, even for the energy transition that was mentioned to do with the Suez Canal Economic Zone. But surely the insurance industry is, sort of traditionally very risk averse. I mean, that's the whole nature of insurance, and financial services industry is very risk averse. So what is the insurance industry or financial services sector doing to support the innovation that is needed in order to kind of push this transition towards the circular economy, towards new green investments that is needed? Perhaps you could say a little about that. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Firstly, no, we're not risk averse. The insurance industry manages risk rather than avoids risk. So our whole existence is based on risk. If we were risk averse, we wouldn't do business. We definitely embrace risk. We definitely take on risk. It's just that we manage it. We study it. We manage it in order to accept it or refuse it. And if we accept it, how to price it. I would say that the insurance industry in general, and other people would be best fit to talk about insurance. I'm not an insurance man. I'm heading a group which has insurance companies as subsidiaries, but we're also the largest investor in the country. We are the largest institutional investor in the country. So I'll talk to you about the insurance business in a few words, and then I'll move, in my opinion, to more important, excuse me, a more important question, because the insurance companies are there to do business. They're not going to push anyone to do anything. If our colleagues wish to go green, we'll support them. If they wish to go brown, we'll probably support them for a while, and then we'll be forced to do green because the reinsurers will breathe down our neck in order to do what the whole world is doing. Insurance companies are normally followers, and they want to do business, whatever the business is. So they're always there to help. They're always there to serve. So whichever of the beautiful projects that we heard about, whether in Egypt or outside Egypt, whichever of them is progressed, whichever of them takes place, the insurance companies are always there to support. I don't see any problem with the insurance companies. And I also don't see the insurance companies as plowing ahead and leading the herd and actually making things happen. Again, insurance companies, you can look at them as passive participants. They're there to help. They'll always be there to help because otherwise they won't do business. And in that sense, it's comforting. It's comforting to know that they're there. Same way that it's comforting to know that the financial institutions, for example, lending money, are always there for good projects. So the creativity and the innovation and the taking the lead in general, green or no green, will not come from the insurance companies. And in my view, also will not come from the lending institutions. Both are there to help. Both are there to support. The ideas and the creativity have to come from the investors. And I respect the statement that was said this morning and echoed again in this panel that governments don't have money. Yes, governments don't have money to spend on stuff that we're talking about today, but governments in specific areas of the world have money that is stored somewhere else that could also be called upon to invest. Unfortunately, we're a government-owned company, by the way, or we're a government-owned group. We are the richest group in the country. We are the largest institutional investor in the country. We are ready to help and we are ready to invest. We are ready to support. But we are generally not called upon to do that. I don't know about the case in other countries, But in Egypt, the government-owned institutions could very easily serve as the locomotive, and they have always done that, whether on the investment side or on the lending side. But the whole world seems to think that government intervention in anything is just not benign. They tend to paint the whole scene with one brush, which should not be the case. There are countries like Egypt where government-owned institutions are still there. They are still operating. They're still operating very well. We are welcoming all the initiatives by the government to crowd in the private sector, including taking stakes in our own companies. And actually, one of our companies, which is the leading life insurance company, is coming to the market, whether for strategic investor or for the IPOs. But in general, we're still there. The National Bank of Egypt is still there. Banque Misr is still there. These are government institutions. When we're speaking now about the going green and changing direction in any aspect that we're talking about, we have to treat these institutions as partners. Unfortunately, the outside world always looks at an economy from the outside, and they want to see the private sector. Fine, we all want to see the private sector, but my proposition always to the institutional investors, to the international institutions, to the multilateral institutions, look for the specifics, look for country specifics. What works for Kenya, for example, would not work for Egypt. If you, I mean, I've had this discussion with one of the World Bank subsidiaries who actually believe that they should not be working with state-owned enterprises in any country in the world. Fine, come to Egypt. Who will you work with? All the leading institutions are state-owned enterprises, and actually, this has delayed partly the initiative to go green in a specific area. We as a group, we don't have, for example, a green fund in Egypt. We don't, not yet, not until this moment. We wanted to go green in this aspect. We wanted to establish a green fund, and we went to the international institutions, organizations, asking for help. And this was more than a year and a half ago. Nothing happened so far. Why? Because we're government owned. This will always be a hurdle. This will always hold back a country like Egypt. And now, as you can see, these 2 weeks, we are open to the entire universe. We want to do something on the green side. We want to go the extra mile. But at the same time, the outside world has to tailor its perspective to suit a country like Egypt in order to help Egypt. Because what you can do with a few government institutions leading an initiative, especially in the investment side and the finance side, you can jumpstart the entire operation. You can jumpstart the entire initiative rather than go around the market looking for private entities who are either too small to take the risk, or believe that the absence of the government institutions is a red flag. Dr. Hala was talking this morning about the sovereign fund taking a minority stake in some of the important investments to give comfort to the private sector. The private sector, if anything, is risk averse, to borrow your quote. So seeing the government there will give them the comfort. My proposition always to the international institutions is work with the government-owned companies in a country like Egypt, because then, and only then, will we achieve the progress that we all aspire to, whether in green or other. But we're here to talk about green, so let's focus and concentrate on green.
Thank you so much. And so that's really speaking to the need for partnership between private sector and governments, that public sector and private sector need to work together. And I imagine that you would encourage people who are here this week, next week, to really use the opportunity to engage with representatives from the Egyptian government in order to see how there is opportunity to work together moving forward on these issues. Thank you very much. May I come back to your Oh. Okay, it's found. Problem solved. Okay. Very glad we were able to solve that problem. We may have challenges solving the rest of the world's problems, but at least that's one we can cross off the list. I was actually going to ask Your Excellency a question to do with challenges in the world, because we heard challenges bigger than the loss of the folder. We heard earlier this week on Monday, clearly the world is very behind on its COP26 commitments. There's been geopolitical disturbances, all sorts of stuff going on in the world. We're still recovering from or still trying to deal with the post effects of the pandemic, as well as other major issues in the world. So in the context of change and disturbance and other challenges, isn't sustainability and some of these issues the first thing to get dropped? And what is it, how is a government, how is a public sector organization able to help mainstream the right sort of green technologies, circular economy technologies, the things that we know are necessary, but how do we mainstream those to make sure that they don't get dropped as soon as there's another global challenge on the horizon?
Thank you. That's a very important question. I think this is one of the issues that we're facing today. Going back to the projects that we're talking about for the green fuel that we have, one of the things is their financing from DFIs around the world, especially the ones that are coming from Europe. One of the issues is cheap financing, concessions, grants. It needs to be based on that. There is countries and continents that are setting out or earmarking investments for that. They need that. Demand in the world for this green fuel that will solve a lot of problems in the coming years are still thin, but it's really bigger than that. The unofficial demand is on the sidelines, waiting for the price and waiting to see that these projects really deliver. At the same time, people are reluctant to move ahead. So it's like a cat and mouse kind of thing. But we, as a governmental entity, we work with the Ministry of Planning, the Sovereign Fund, the Ministry of Electricity together to help solve a lot of the issues that these companies are facing, and talking on their behalf with relevant governmental authorities in Egypt or even outside Egypt. Because we knew that for this to happen, to transform the SC zone in specific and Egypt at large to be a green fuel hub to help the world, we are at a very unique location between three continents: Europe, Asia, and Africa. Africa is the least to populate the world, but at the same time, we have two continents that you are very close by. And again, I'm saying this fuel is important with proximity. So helping to solve issues with respect to technology, the electrolyzers, having them close by, even which type of electrolyzer, is it PEM, alkaline? And we're learning this by the day. Even them, they're learning it by the day. But the thing is, I feel there's a new market that has not been tapped yet, which is Egypt is one of the top 5 producers in the world with respect to gray ammonia. Still, there's a market for blue ammonia. And converting gray to blue is quite easy, not capital intensive, and will serve and transform a lot of the industry locally and internationally for providing that important fuel, the blue ammonia. Having said this, the green ammonia that being produced is not really green. And I'll use my definition of that. It's 50 shades of green. Because if you want to be really green, it's not going to happen before 10, 15 years from today. Because that will have to add to it mobility. You will add to it the buildings that they will set out. You will add a lot of things. But it's even the Ministry of Electricity is adding maybe in 8 to 10 years time, a utility electricity corridor from where the generation happens to where the SC zone will use that power generated, separate from the grid. By the first 10 years, we will be using the current grid, effectively mixing molecules between conventional energy and let's say, renewable energy. That will be split after maybe a few years because of the size of the renewables needed. I believe there's a lot of things going to happen around the world. And for instance, and this is my view, it took us 100 years to replace or have an alternative fossil fuel cars. Natural gas, then electric cars. I see that electric cars will be having a life of another 20 years. Then you will have mobility using green fuel, because you don't have the problem of replacing the batteries every 10, 15 years, which is around 65% of the car. So technologies will happen. We're talking with them. Financing is another issue. I think it's more of a commitment of the world of how to push these projects. And there's another also delusion around the world is, and companies, even when they're talking with us, they're saying, okay, you want us to come to the SE zone? Give us incentives. Sometimes they go too much of what they ask. Or we go to Saudi, or we go to Morocco. No, you will go to Saudi, you will go to Morocco, you will go to Egypt. The world will need such hubs. It's not this or that, it's both. If we're talking about the green fuel that will help the world for the next 50 to 100 years, the size of land that is required to generate renewables is so huge that not one country will be able to deliver. Adding to it the shipping, you need to have stations for all. It cannot be served from one country like Egypt. It has been Oman, it has been Australia, India, Morocco, and so on, Chile. So it's not one country will have to be the main place. You will have several hubs, one bigger than another, but at the end of the day, it's a collective act between a lot of companies. One last thing before I close, the 15 or 16 MOUs, and this is the key for all of this happening for green fuel, are all renewable companies. They are entering this generation of green fuel, whether it's ammonia, hydrogen, or methanol, for the first time in their life. They are charting in uncharted waters. But the others that already doing fossil fuel are on the sidelines waiting, and they will come in, like the BP, like the Shell, like Chevron, like other fossil fuel producing companies are starting now to say, hey, why am I waiting on the sideline? They're starting to come. And these are the players that have been in this business for so long, and you know to convert it fast. We need to find a way of getting them to be incentivized to invest in these important new fuels, because the ones that are doing it, that is already doing the generation of power, and for the first time they're doing green ammonia, and that's all the 16. Thank you.
Thank you very much for reinforcing the message about shades of green, and sort of it's a stepping process, you know, one step at a time to sort of go through that transition, but at the same time reinforcing the need for the rate of change in order to really start making a difference. And Bobby, I'd like to come back to you in terms of something you mentioned earlier to do with kind of digital poverty, if I can call it that, and sort of when it comes to technology, telecommunications, it is so important to the growth of economies and to empowerment of people. And so with that, with the digital poverty that it does still exist in so many parts of the world, the lack of access to the smartphones, to the networks that can enable people to connect with the rest of the world, what can a company, a big corporate like Vodafone, do to sort of accelerate that rate of change, that access to digital technology, to empower people in all parts of the world, but at the same time hold that intention with the need for resource minimalization, you know, a circular economy, etc. Could you say a little more on that? Thank you.
Sure, yeah. I mean, the scale of the digital divide is enormous. So 2.7 billion people have never accessed the internet globally, which is it's just wild to me. That's almost half of the world has never been on the internet. And sometimes I think, oh, that sounds like bliss, you know, because sometimes you just you're on your phone all day and then you just want to throw it away and not see it for a while, which might sound a bit strange coming from me. But we know that having access to the internet yields better health outcomes, better education outcomes, and economic prosperity. And the UN Secretary General himself has said that the new dividing line in society will be those who are connected versus those who are unconnected, because it has such a strong correlation with other developmental outcomes. So this is something we urgently need to address. Now, we know at Vodafone that 98% of the world's population is covered by a 3, 4, or 5G signal. So they should be able to access the internet. And we've done a lot of sort of head scratching about why, therefore, there is such a divide. And not just because we want to get people online, but it makes business sense for us. It's expensive to build networks, and we want people to use them when we're building them. So we've actually been working with the UN, with the World Bank and the ITU around this issue to really dig into what is causing this divide. And we found out actually the main cause is the cost of a smartphone. So this is the barrier that's keeping people offline. And in the countries where this is the biggest issue, it's the hardest to access the finance to buy a phone. So in the UK, in a lot of Europe, probably here, it's very easy to get a phone on finance. Most people will pay off their phone over 12 or 24 months. They don't have to outlay the, it could be £1,000, £2,000 of a new phone. But where that's needed the most, particularly in our sub-Saharan African markets, there isn't this formal financing system. So we've realized that this cost of the smartphone and actually just getting to a shop to buy one is the biggest issue. So with this research that we've done with the UN, we took it to the UN General Assembly this September, and we got a set of recommendations approved, the UN, which we're really, really thrilled about. And we're now busy rolling these out across our markets. And the number one recommendation to actually increase digital access globally was to improve the supply of refurbished smartphones, because we know there is loads of phones in our drawers at home that could be refurbished and that could then be supplied to people at a much lower cost who don't have access to the internet. So I kind of go back to my earlier points. To make that happen, we need a standard of what a high quality refurbished smartphone looks like, because without that standard, what we're finding is when we try and ship refurbished smartphones into a number of our African markets, they're being taxed as luxury goods, and there's a 40% tax markup put on that. So while that still exists, it's very, very hard to make these phones affordable. So we're looking for a new standard that will help create this supply chain and trade around refurbished phones. We also need to look at the increased use of financing schemes, particularly through micropayments, pay back the phone cost. So we're rolling out some schemes using our M-Pesa mobile money service there. And finally, everyone keeps saying that governments have no money. No one has any money at the moment, I think. So we'd like to cooperate a bit more with governments on using universal service funds, which were traditional pots of money that exist in governments to fund rural network rollout. Given that the networks are more or less there, we'd like to use those funds now to subsidize the smartphones that help people actually use them. So I think it's this package of goods. And I think, to go back to the earlier point, it's about partnership. We can't do this on our own as Vodafone. We need to work with phone manufacturers, with governments, with regulators, and with financial institutions to create this digital inclusion ecosystem.
That's great. Thank you very much. And thank you for reinforcing the point about partnerships again. Siobhan, another question for you. How can trade and investment be used as a lever, as a push to try and promote more sustainable practices, maybe towards circular economy, maybe to the use of green energy? Because, if it's purely down to private sector with no other agenda, it's just about, economic growth or growing the business. It's not about, worrying about ESG on the other side, as it were. How can trade and investment, or how is trade and investment being used as a lever to kind of stimulate better sustainable practices? And whose job is it to sort of make that happen?
So trade is really at the heart of what the chambers are about. 79 chambers all over the world. We know when we ask our businesses, what is your number one obstacle to trading? It is finding a partner or distributor in that other market. And about 10%, for example, about 10% of UK businesses export, about 60% of chamber members export. And that is because they are great at giving advice, the right documentation, and then, of course, finding a partner into your market. And earlier we were talking about how we incentivize sustainability, circular economy, shades of green. And as business people, you know how you do that. You show people the business case for it. You show the business case for green innovation, and there are, as we've already touched on, huge opportunities all over the place in terms of green innovation. And trading in those new green services and products is a massive part of that business case. So showing businesses that that is something they can do off the back of inventing new products and services is a massive part of that business case. So I think it is our role as chambers, our role as businesses, our role with our supply chains or our customer bases to show the business case, encourage that green innovation. And the other thing I think that a lot of markets do a lot better than the UK, for example, is start with export. You start with a product that you're sending to another country, as opposed to always thinking it's going to be a domestic opportunity first. So that's where I focus on trade.
That's great. Thank you very much. And Basil, if I could ask you one more question, and then in a moment we'll open up to the floor. So please be ready with any questions from the audience, please, to any of our panelists. We spoke earlier about private sector is reluctant to work with public sector institutions. There's a bit of a tension sometimes, or they feel that public sector is too slow. Private sector maybe is more risk averse than organizations that you've mentioned before. How can that partnership be reinforced, or what is being done perhaps within Egypt in order to really encourage trade and investment, but trade and investment which is greener than just a little shade of green, that's actually really trying to push an agenda towards more sustainable projects? Thank you.
Okay, we've heard about all different colors this morning. I mean, to me, it's blue and other stuff, which is great. It's even more creative. I think we should deal with green first, and then go to the other shades. No, I don't think that the problem is between the private sector and the public sector. Like I said, well, that's my humble opinion. I believe that the problem is the outside world's perspective of the public sector in Egypt, and the again, the painting with one brush, the idea that everything that's state-owned should not be dealt with, and they should go and help the private sector. And again, in my view, a country like Egypt, in order to help the private sector, you have to go through the public sector or use the public sector. I'm not talking about governments, by the way, Khalis, and I still stand by what I said. Yes, the government per se does not have the money to spend on projects and investments, and it should not have, actually. Government finances have to be directed to schools, hospitals, safety nets that Her Excellency spoke about this morning. It is the government-owned entities like the sovereign funds that should come up with the financing. And actually, it's a great opportunity, and I'm thanking Biba for it, that His Excellency and myself are sitting on this panel, because we haven't dealt with, for example, SC Zone, which is the now appears, from what he's saying, the most about this unique location of Egypt. We, as I mean, I'm an old man, and I've been studying. I tell you very frankly, I don't think that we've ever capitalized colonists. So every always caught in the middle. But actually capitalizing on this unique situation, here we are hearing from His Excellency that it is finally happening. So I'm telling you, by the way, that we are open for business. We are a large investor. We have an appetite, so we can very much help in your projects. It will not be cheap financing, but it is financing which important, by the way. I was telling this to a friend last week who was complaining about the cost of financing. Availability is very important. It's even much more important than cost. When we have these lined up, the financial institutions lined up, the financing lined up, the creativity of the projects lined up, then we can help this facilitation of trade, facilitation of exports, and that it is becoming more and more evident that the power of Egypt realization and exports are a lifeline. Actually, as soon as mentioned the BII, I sent the contact details of Shireen Shohdi to my colleague, who is the chief investment officer of our largest companies, because we want to extend our cooperation with them. So not the public sector. I mean, it's not the right word. We don't have public sector in Egypt anymore. Government is not past 4 years, when they sensed that we are serious, when they sense that we move fast enough. We don't hide behind laws and regulations. It's very easy, by the way, to hide behind laws and regulations and to fake hard on you. No, this is not the set. Everyone in and you will find the scope.
Very powerful. The stage is set for business. About the need or the opportunity for external visitors coming to interact with Egypt, but perhaps there are also in-country partnerships that can be forged through events like this. Thank you. We've got time for just a couple of questions from the floor. So if anybody has a question for us, and please, if you could just briefly say your name, which organization you're from, and who your question is directed to, if there is a particular panelist you would like to answer. Thank you.
So my name is Valentina Krechma. I'm Energy Transition Director for Capricorn Energy. And my question is for His Excellency regarding hydrogen. Thank you very much to all the panelists, actually, for really insightful presentations and your insights on these kind of really important topics. But on hydrogen, we are hearing a lot about supply, but we are not hearing enough about demand for hydrogen. So how are we going to open demand? Because currently supply is running ahead of demand. In your view, which sectors of the economy are going to open demand? And when do you expect that to happen? Because at the moment we are emitting a lot of radio waves, enough receptors. And if we want to scale up, as you were saying, and bring costs down, this is not going to happen if it has nowhere to go. So your
next 20 5 years. So what I signed on a step down approach with respect to price, starting, let's say, from 700 euros per ton for green ammonia, coming down till reaching around 400 after 25 years. That will stimulate demand, the official demand. But I said in my early talk that there's unofficial demand waiting on the sidelines, waiting to see this so-called supply, but there's no really supply in the market. It's all declared projects that never happened on the ground. That's why people think it's so big. 16 MOUs in Egypt. I don't know how much in Morocco, how much in Chile, South Africa, Namibia, Australia. But what's on the ground? There's a handful of projects. One of them just launched yesterday in Egypt. So, but is there demand? No, there's huge demand. But they're waiting. First delivery, making sure that the pilot project is really successful, and that they're not, because what being asked for them is to fix a price for 25 years is nonsense. Right now, some DFIs started to get that. I'm thankful one of them is sitting here right now, to accept financing these projects on a step-down approach with respect to price. Otherwise, these companies after 10 years will start to just not be obliged to meet their contracts when the price goes down. How to stimulate that more, or who's going to use that? I think in the first 10 years it will be like countries that intentionally want to decarbonize, want to reach net zero with certain dates that have committed, mostly EU countries. Okay. Thereafter will be the developing countries. I see maybe Egypt will start using this fuel after 10 years, not before. I doubt, because the price is too expensive. Maybe when we compare it to the current prices of other fuels today, they're leveled, but because we have inflation. But when inflation subsides, maybe in 2-3 years, the price will still be high. The first big projects that we have in the zone will not happen before 26, first half 26. So my only project today is a 100 megawatt project, which delivers 100,000 tons of green hydrogen per year, which is around 500,000 tons of green ammonia per year. The other developments of supply is the price. There's an issue with whether we should go big, the price goes down, or we should start small and medium. There will be consolidations, but the scale has to happen. And all these companies now understand that. But I argue there is demand, but they're waiting it at the right price. And the DFIs, the investment community, and others need to understand that. Like Mr. Hini was saying, that the investment, Holding is a big investment partner. When we did the MOUs with these companies, it was very easy for me as a zone to just rent the factories, rent the land for 50 years. That's it. But we got an option that we invest in kind for that. The same thing for the Ministry of Electricity. The sovereign fund will make a sub-fund for these green hydrogen projects to allow institutional investors to come in and push that as partnerships in these projects. Because there's no price being paid for the sun or the wind. And that's in Egypt or any other country that will deliver that. So that price is that I need an uptake or a benefit to be inside these projects. So we believe in these projects. We saw it's a learning curve. We've been learning for the first time one of these projects happened in Feb 21. They presented the case. Honestly, I was thinking it's not going to happen before 20 years. I see a totally different atmosphere right now with all what's happening with inflation, with what's happening in Europe, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we've run out of time for this session. And I know one of our panelists has to leave, but I think others, Your Excellency, are you still around? Yes. So if there are other questions, and Bobby Siobhan, you're still around, yes. So if there are other questions, then perhaps those can be picked up over the lunch break, which follows immediately after the next session. So thank you all very much for your contributions this morning. Thank you for joining our panel. And I hope you will join me in showing them our appreciation in the usual way. Thank you.
Actually, can I just say, look, thank you again on behalf of Khaled and I to all of the panel members, Siobhan, Bobby, Basil, and you, Your Excellency, for being here. But I think I hope you'll all agree with me. We should say a special thank you to Caroline, because you know, what you've demonstrated today, in the same way as the ambassador said, what a minister when Dr. Saeed left. You know, this has got nothing to do with building bridges. And its skill base is clearly much more. So, Caroline, thank you for great moderation this morning. So, thank you all. I think Magid, who is standing up next to Khaled, do you want to wave, Magid, is going to chair the next session. So, if his panel can start to assemble, we'll have a 5-minute break and then go off